Diana had been working as a nurse for 3 years and had managed to earn a reputation as a responsible and qualified employee. However, unlike most medical personnel, she didn't work at a clinic, but at a homeless shelter, where people who found themselves in difficult life situations lived. The kind and sympathetic young woman was loved not only by her colleagues, but also by the residents of the shelter, who were always looking forward to her arrival. Some needed their blood pressure checked, others needed to get an injection or an IV. As Diana was hurrying to get to work that day, all she was thinking about were her patients, waiting for her at the shelter. The young woman always walked to work because she loved getting some fresh air in the morning. Diana smiled at the rare passers-by and rejoiced in the gentle summer sun. Suddenly, the woman's attention was attracted by some commotion on the sidewalk. A handful of people gathered around a man lying on the pavement. Diana stepped closer and realized that the situation was serious. The man was lying on his back, he was unconscious, and was barely showing signs of life. Based on the situation and the man's condition, Diana quickly concluded that he was having a heart attack. "Step aside, everyone. Did any of you call an ambulance?" Diana asked and got down to business. Diana started CPR, and fortunately, the man quickly responded to it. He let out an uncertain sigh and then started coughing. Soon, they all heard the ambulance sirens, and the paramedics arrived a minute later. Having loaded the man onto a stretcher, the paramedics thanked Diana for giving him first aid. "If it weren't for you, miss, this man would have died. He's having a heart attack and didn't have time to wait for our arrival," the paramedic said, shaking Diana's hand. The young nurse blushed and looked down in embarrassment. She knew that she didn't do anything special, just her job. Having sent the man a mental wish for a speedy recovery, she went to work. As she approached the homeless shelter, Diana felt her smartphone vibrate in her pocket. Glancing at the screen, the woman smiled. It was a text message from Patrick, who invited her to have dinner with his parents. Diana thought for a moment, then texted him back with a smile on her face. In the depths of her soul, the woman had her doubts as to whether she should have accepted that dinner invitation. Patrick's parents were business people, and Diana grew up in a poor family. Her mother worked as a cleaner, and her father was a disabled man after he suffered an accident at work. Therefore, the woman was a little worried that Patrick's family might see her as a gold digger. But on the other hand, Diana and Patrick were good together, and therefore, nothing should have been able to stand in the way of their relationship. All the young nurse could think of that day was the upcoming dinner. Somehow, even the morning incident, when the woman had to perform CPR on the man on the street, faded into the background. Her shift dragged on painfully slowly. And when it finally ended, Diana was very happy. Her boyfriend met her by the exit and kissed her on the cheek. Then the young couple went over to Patrick's house, holding hands. By the time they arrived, Amanda Young had already set the table and was looking forward to the guests' arrival. But having seen Diana wearing a simple dress and cheap shoes, the woman frowned with displeasure and invited her in somewhat unfriendly. During the dinner, Mrs. Young paid virtually no attention to her son's girlfriend. William Young also didn't approve of Patrick's choice and spent the entire evening smoking a cigar, not even touching his dinner. Diana felt the cold coming from the hosts, but there was nothing she could do about it. And only Patrick's encouraging looks helped her hold on and not get completely discouraged. At the end of the evening, Mrs. Young used a pretend migraine as an excuse to retire to her room in order not to see off the guests. Diana understood everything without words, and having thanked Mr. Young for his hospitality, started getting ready to go home. When the door closed behind the young woman, Amanda Young left her room and started a very unpleasant conversation with Patrick. "Son, it seems to me that this woman isn't a good match for you. Your father and I have already found you a suitable companion. She's the daughter of an oil man, Mitchell. They have multi-million-dollar assets in several banks all over the country. Just imagine the opportunities you could get from such a relationship. By marrying Olivia Mitchell, you will increase our capital several times and strengthen your father's business. Patrick glared at his mother, but didn't protest. In the depths of his soul, he saw all women as kind of the same and didn't really feel the need to single out any one of them. The young womanizer was only attracted to Diana because he felt intrigued and wanted to seduce her, and he wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted. Thus, Patrick was determined to implement his idea that would help him achieve his goal. He bought a wedding ring in a jewelry store and proposed to Diana. Needless to say, the young woman was taken by surprise, especially after the memorable dinner at the house of Patrick's parents. "Yes, dear, yes. You're so sweet," Diana replied with tears in her eyes. "Well, we're going to be husband and wife soon," Patrick said. That was the first night the young people spent together. At the same time, the man was well aware that his mother would throw a fit when she learned that he proposed to Diana. Diana spent the next month planning their wedding. On the day of the celebration, the young woman came to the city hall. She was wearing an inexpensive wedding dress, which looked very elegant and feminine on her chiseled figure. The groom wasn't there yet, so Diana decided to wait for him in the hall. There was another wedding taking place at the city hall that day. Unlike Diana's, that wedding was very lavish. When compared to the outfit of the rich bride, Diana's dress looked very simple and cheap. Soon, an expensive limousine stopped in front of the city hall, and Patrick stepped out with a bouquet of roses. Diana yelped happily and waved her hand at him. Ignoring the bride, Patrick went inside the city hall and walked towards the altar. As is customary, he was followed by Mr. and Mrs. Young, who both looked very important. When Patrick caught up with Diana, the woman extended her hands invitingly. Imagine her surprise when the groom simply passed her by and went to the rich bride who was standing at the altar. Diana tried to catch up with Patrick, but Mrs. Young firmly blocked her path. "You must have made a mistake, young woman. Patrick is getting married to Olivia Mitchell, not you." Diana turned pale and instinctively took a couple of steps back. Meanwhile, Patrick approached the rich bride and, having kissed her on the cheek, handed her the bouquet. Diana couldn't watch it anymore. She quickly headed for the exit, covering her face with her hands. Trying to ignore the caustic comments of the wedding guest, the woman rushed to leave the city hall before she burst into tears. People on the street looked curiously at the bride, who was slowly walking down the street and crying softly. At that moment, the woman couldn't care less about the fact that the bottom of her dress was dragging on the pavement, getting dirty on the ground, still wet from the recent rain. Suddenly, a car stopped a few yards away from Diana. It was an expensive, late-model Chevrolet and involuntarily attracted the attention of passers-by. A fit, gray-haired man stepped out of the car and waved his hand invitingly at the bride. "Hello, Diana. Do you remember me? I'm Alfred Gray. You saved my life about a month ago when I had a heart attack," the man said happily. Diana wiped her tears and looked into the man's face. "Yes, I remember you, sir," the woman answered quietly. Even though Alfred was surprised by the way Diana was dressed, he decided against asking any questions, but simply offered her a ride. On the way to the woman's house, Mr. Gray told her that on that fateful day, he wanted to mow the lawn in front of his house. Unfortunately, the man barely had time to start as the lawnmower broke down, so Alfred had to go to the nearest store to buy spare parts. Despite the fact that the man was rich, he always repaired the equipment himself, paying tribute to his engineering past. But when Alfred was some 100 yards away from the store, he suddenly started feeling unwell and fainted. Seeing the man in his battered overalls, passers-by assumed that he was some homeless person who had too much to drink, and only Diana decided to stop and help him. Having heard Mr. Gray out, the young nurse shook her head and furtively wiped away a tear. The young woman still couldn't stop thinking about Patrick's betrayal and how he made her the laughingstock in front of the whole city. Alfred cleared his throat and asked a question that worried him. "Can I ask you to do one more thing for me?" "I will pay for it, of course. Don't worry about that." "It depends on what you need," Diana answered quietly. Alfred stopped the car at the woman's house and continued. "You see, my son Billy needs medical assistance. 3 years ago, he got into a car accident with his mother. Unfortunately, my wife didn't survive, and our son lost both of his legs. Ever since then, Billy has been depressed. He even refuses to do physical therapy or follow any of the doctor's orders. I want you to help him master the prosthesis, as well as keep track of his medication. What do you say? Will you do it?" Diana took some time to think about Mr. Gray's proposal. "And what do I actually have to lose? I'll take some time off from my main job and help the unfortunate man get back to normal," Diana thought to herself. Having accepted Mr. Gray's offer, the woman came over to his house the very next day. Billy turned out to be a pleasant young man with sad, gray eyes and an aristocratic, slightly pale face. The millionaire's son took Diana's arrival with outright hostility. "Why did my father think that hiring you was a good idea? It's not like I will grow new legs now that you're here," Billy said with resentment. But Diana wasn't about to give up. She was determined to make it work. Ignoring the man's words, the young nurse asked him to put on his prosthesis and take at least a couple of steps in them. Billy refused to do it and tried to argue, but the woman didn't pay any attention to it. The first independent steps were very hard for the man to make. Billy seemed to be trying to burn the nurse down with his eyes. She was deliberately trying to hurt his pride in order to motivate him to work harder. About a month later, they started seeing the first results. Of course, Billy was still far from being able to dance, but he could already walk rather confidently. Unbeknownst to himself, the man grew attached to Diana, who was like a guardian angel to him. These things happen when people are united by a common idea. They often develop warm feelings towards each other. Thus, instead of staying in Alfred's house for 1 month like she promised, she spent half a year there. The businessman couldn't be happier with his son's success and was beyond grateful to Diana for her help. And when his son informed Alfred that he wanted to marry Diana, the man was happy to approve of his choice. Billy proposed to Diana, and she said yes, although she couldn't shake off the feeling of déjà vu. However, unlike Patrick, her new fiancé turned out to be a man of his word and keep his promise. By becoming Billy's wife, Diana finally got the happy family life she had always dreamed of. Having become a reliable partner for her husband, the woman supported him in all of his endeavors and even advised him on his business. One day, Diana saw Patrick at one of the business meetings. He came to see Billy Gray in order to ask for financial assistance on one of his projects. Meeting the eyes of his ex-fiancée, Patrick turned pale and understood everything without words. Of course, he didn't get any help that day. Billy Gray was used to trusting his wife in everything and thus rejected Patrick's proposal. Meanwhile, having enjoyed seeing her ex-fiancé get put in his place, Diana turned to her husband and whispered something in his ear. Billy's face brightened instantly and his lips stretched into a sweet smile. The news of Diana's pregnancy was the best gift for his upcoming birthday. Embracing his wife, Billy looked proudly at Alfred Gray, who would soon become a grandfather.